Welcome to this beautiful watercolor tutorial called Open on One End, two beautiful amaryllis flowers. You're going to be using Misket for this painting. You'll also be using some salt for this painting. The brushes that I used was my nice big 2-inch flat. I also used my number 4 round, so you could use a 2 or 4, whichever you're more comfortable with. I used my number 1 rigger, my fine liner, and also my wisp brush, but you could certainly use a fan if you would prefer. You should misket the stamen in your amaryllis flowers because you want to keep them nice and clean. You should also have your drawing drawn so that you have all the petals drawn because we're going to be painting them petal by petal. So you want to make sure you have all individual petals drawn. The colors that we're going to be using today are cad yellow. We'll also be using some yellow ochre, which is more of a golden yellow. We are going to be using sap green. We'll be using our indigo blue. We're going to be using purple or violet, and that color I used mainly for my background. So if you don't want to use that, that's an okay thing too. And we'll be using some black. We'll be using a very little bit of burnt sienna. We're going to be using alizarin crimson for the flowers, but you could use any rosy color, a rose madder, or even cadmium red if you'd rather use red. And we're going to be using a little bit of cerulean blue mixed with some of our greens. We are going to be wetting each petal first before we put in the pinks. I started with my pinks so that I would be able to get in as much pink as possible on a nice clean background versus if I started with my greens and then realized I put too much green in. So I started with my pinks. I'm going to do each individual petal. I'm not going to do wet against wet. I will do dry against wet, so I'll be moving all around. But I want to wet all of the areas of my petals that have the alizarin crimson color to them. I'll wet them first and then put in some very wet alizarin crimson where I see the alizarin crimson in the petals, and then I'm going to salt those areas. And I'm going to be doing that, as I said, petal by petal. I'm not going to be doing two right up against each other. I want to work dry against wet, so I'll be moving all around. Refer to your picture so that you know where the pinks are. It helps to look at your picture so you can see that. None of the pinks right now are very intense. They're watered down, so they're all on a wet background, and they are all salted. So follow your picture, do all of your pinks. Remember, it's wet first, then put your nice wet pinks in so that it'll have a nice soft blend to them, and salt them. Now, after you're done with all of your leaves or all of your petals, you can see how you have all of your pinks in. We're going to move down and we're going to work on the base of the flowers and the stem. I used mainly sap green and yellow for these, but it's your personal preference what you like. You don't want to do anything intensely dark right now. Some of them will be darker, but you want to work in nice light colors right now. I'm doing section by section, again working dry up against my wet, not wet against wet. And I'm using sap mixed with a little bit of yellow or very watered down sap. You don't want anything to be really dark and intense right now. I'm putting in my color down at the base or where the color is a little bit darker than the rest of the piece that I'm working on. I will just drop in a little bit of more intense paint, but nothing too dark. And then I'm using my rigger to drag out some of that darker color to already make some very loose veins. Nothing real detailed yet. Nice loose veins. Follow your picture. We're going to go section by section, deepening the bases with the same color but just more intensity, not so watered down. And we will move again from place to place because we don't want to work wet against wet. Some of my greens will change slightly. You can add a little bit of sienna to some of your greens to make them a little bit darker, or you can add a little bit of indigo. Again, your personal preference, but you definitely want to follow your picture. If it's easier for you to watch the video a few minutes ahead so you can see what I'm doing, please do that. You can always reverse the video to go back and then proceed, but you'll at least know what to look for or what you're getting into and have everything ready so that you're not stopping midstream and letting things dry on you. Continue with your greens. If you feel that you want to show some texturing, throw on a little bit of salt. All of the fine veining comes much later, but if you want to put in some paler, loose veining, you can do that now while it's nice and wet. Of course, you're going to salt when it's wet, but you do not want to do wet against wet. All of these places on the video where it seems that I'm working right up against each other, I have had time to stop the video, let things dry before I'm proceeding. So you have to remember you don't want to go wet against wet for the different sections of the buds or the petals. You want to wait for things to dry. Now working on the base of the stem, anytime you want to blend in darker colors, you do put that in while it's wet so that you get a nice soft blend. So we're working on this stem, adding a little bit of darker color. You're doing that while it's wet so you get that nice blended color. Waiting for things to dry. You can wait for things to dry or use a hair dryer, whichever is easier. But you want to work, again, I can't tell you enough times, you want to work dry against wet, not wet against wet. You don't want all of your colors bleeding together. You want to show exact detail, but you want some of that detail to blend. Some of your darker colors that you're going to put in, you can mix a little bit of black with your sap, or you can mix indigo with your sap to get the deeper colors. If it's something that is in total shadow, there's no reason for you to paint it a light green and then go back in and paint the entire thing as a shadow. It's just so much easier to go ahead and paint it in shadow the first time. That does not mean that you should do that for the things that just have partial shadows or slight blended shadows. This is for things that are totally in shadow, and you don't really want to waste time or your paints when you can just do it totally in shadow the first time. Now when we work the leaves, we're going to be painting each individual leaf with some sap green. Again, I mixed my sap with some yellow. I'm going to be painting each individual leaf the lightest color of sap, which you would see on the outside of the leaf, that really fine little line that's the outside of the leaf. I will then go back in and deepen the insides, leaving that nice little fine edge of your lighter green. I'm doing all of my leaves individually, painting them all individually with that sap mixed with some yellow before I go in and put the deeper color on. Now the outside leaf on the other side is a deeper sap, so I'm going to be using some sap mixed with indigo for that color. It's not as light as the other ones. Nice wet lines. Use your paint. Keep dipping into that paint so that you don't get hard lines. You want that paint to always remain nice and wet the whole time you're painting it. Nice and wet. It's watercolor. You don't want to try to stretch the paint by dragging it through a dry paper. You want that wet paint to flow on your paper. So keep dipping into your paint. Mix enough paint that you have a nice little puddle of paint. The paint goes so far, it's not wasting it to mix a little bit of a puddle. So make sure you have a nice amount mixed that you can go back into so you can keep that paint nice and wet and flowing for you. Now to go back into my deeper center, I mixed my sap with some black and I'm doing the inside of the leaves. This is the inside of each leaf and I'm going to leave a very thin edge of my light green on these leaves. After I get them painted in, and while they are still nice and wet, I'm going to be dropping in some black into the base to give the leaf some depth. Into the base, I'll do a little bit around the edge, and that's going to give that leaf some depth and some roundness to it. So you want to make sure that your paint is nice and wet and is going to remain nice and wet so that you can get that black into the base and allow it to bleed into the wet paint. You will get a much better result that way. Now, if you feel that your outer part of your leaves are a little bit too light, you can put another wash of sap on them. I think mine are just a little bit too light, so I'm going to put just another wash of sap on the outside of these leaves. You don't have to do it, right away. You can do it, anytime. Once you've looked at it for a while, you can decide if you think anything needs darkened. You have all the time in the world to do that. There's no hurry for that. We'll be working on the stem next. So you want to have your wisp ready if you want to make some fine lines through your stem, but you're going to be working with your sap on your stem and you're also going to be working with that nice light cerulean blue. The nice light sap color will come first. This again is my sap green mixed with a little bit of yellow and watered down. And I'm going to be doing my whole stem. I'm using just my smaller brush to get close to the top, but then I'm going to move to a little bit of a bigger brush and go right down my stem with that color. Nice and wet, 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 so that when I put in my cerulean blue, it'll be able to blend and it won't have a hard line. It'll blend right into that nice wet sap color. So be nice and wet with your color. After my stem is all painted in, then I'm going to go ahead and get my little bit of some cerulean blue, and I'm going to run that cerulean blue right down the right hand side of my stem. Cerulean and sap make such a great color. Where my stem attaches to my flower, there's a slight shadow. So while it's wet, I'm going to go ahead and put in a little bit of my watered down black just so it will blend into that nice wet paint. Now you can get a better look at my stem and what I've painted up close so that it's just a little bit easier for you to see how nice the colors blend. They blend so much better when they're nice and wet. It's important that you do a lot of your blending of color when it's wet. Look at that nice smoothness. No hard lines because my paint was nice and wet to accept the blended color. Now you want to get nice clean water because now we're going to put the lime green color in our flowers. We're going to do it the same way we put in the alizarin crimson. We're going to wet first and then add our sap mixed with yellow, more yellow than sap, to get a nice lime color. And you're just going to let that bleed into the water. You're going to do that where you see the color of that lime green on all of your petals. We're doing petal by petal. We are working dry against wet, not wet against wet. So you're going to be working individually on all of the petals, but now you're going to be putting in all of the green, the nice lime green colors. This isn't the shadowing, this is simply the lime green colors. There are a lot of spaces where the shadowing is over the lime green, but we need to put that lime colored in first. So you want to look at your picture, go petal by petal, and put in all of the areas where you see that lime green. If you want to watch the video ahead again a few minutes, you'll see exactly where you're going to be putting your lime green, and it'll just prepare you for what you're going to be doing for this next step. Now when all of your greens are finished, we're going to go in and we're going to start to put in some of our deeper shadows. Your deeper shadows are going to get put in according to your picture. Look at your picture or just watch the video ahead a little bit, but they're going to be done the same way. We're going to wet first. We're going to use nice clean water, especially for this, because you don't want any of the whites of your flowers to get covered with dirty water. We'll add our shadow color, which is a little bit of black mixed with some indigo. It goes on where the water is, so we have a nice soft blend to it. You don't want any real hard edges. You're going to soften it with water if you need to. And in a couple places, we're going to just put a little bit of salt in our shadow, which we never would really do that in a shadow. But on some of these places, you want to see that little bit of speckling. So we're going to go ahead and put the salt in just in a couple places. Otherwise, you want to make sure all of your salt has been removed from the area. Nice and wet, so that we get some nice soft edges to our shadow. Follow your picture. If you're not following the picture and you would rather follow the video, that's perfectly fine. But be sure to watch the video ahead a little ways so that you know where your shadows are going to be going, because you don't want to get any hard lines with your shadows. You want to definitely know what you're going to be doing with your shadows. Take it one petal at a time. We're not doing wet against wet. We're always doing dry against wet. So put your picture where you can really pay attention to it. Nice soft lines. You want to make sure you have nice clean water all the time for this. Take your time with your shadows. Once all of your shadows are done, you want to make sure everything is really, really dry. I'm going to show you up close all of your shadows on your flowers so that you can see where they will all be and what it's going to look like, what the intensities are. Look how nice and deep some of these shadows are, but you need that for your flower to show its depth and its realism. Now we're going to be using our rigger, and we're going to be doing all of the veining and fine lines in the flower. Most of the rigger lines are going to be with your alizarin crimson, but we will do some with some green, and we will do some with some watered down black, very watered down. Most of my vein lines, since they are very faint, and they're not real detailed, quite a few of them I'm doing on a wet surface. So I'm wetting it first so that when I put my lines in, my lines will bleed slightly so that I'm not getting real sharp lines. My lines are going to look a little bit blurred, but that's what they look like in these big fine petals. So I'm going to be wetting those areas first before I put in my vein lines. Now, if you see some of your lines that you want to be more detailed, then you don't have to wet your background or wet your petal. But none, very, very few, other than this first set of veins on this petal, very few are very intense in color, especially the grayish ones. They are very, very pale. You don't want to be real dark on your vein lines. You don't want your flower to look like it has striped petals. You want those vein lines to be very, very faint. take your time, follow the video or follow your picture, but definitely take your time for all of this detail. Now, the detail does not only go on the petals, it's also going to go below the petals on those buds. You can even do some fine lines vertically on the stem with your wisp, but you want to make sure that you get all of those fine lines because look how beautiful this is. It makes it look so real. Now, when we start to put in our background color, it's very important that all of your salt is removed. You do not want salt speckles in your deep black dark background. Whether you use whether you are using black and indigo, black and purple and indigo, purple and indigo, whatever color you are using, even if you choose to just use a turquoise color, you want all of that salt to be removed. I mixed a humongous puddle of indigo and black and a little bit of purple. A huge puddle, enough that I could do my whole picture without worrying about running out of color. I'm going to do my background in 3 sections. I'm going to end at the tips of those flowers and do my left side. I'm going to go to the tips of my right flowers and do the right side, and then I'm going to do the top. I'm using my number 2 round to do close to my petals, and then I'm using my nice big 2-inch flat to do the rest of it. Do you see how wet I am? You need to be super wet. I will also tell you now, your first wash of color, when it dries, it's going to look like crap. It's going to show brush strokes. I don't care how hard you try for that not to happen, it's going to happen. You're going to be able to see brush strokes. You're going to see where some color, maybe blossomed and it's lighter, or it shows some spotting. That's fine. We are doing 3 washes of color on this background to make sure that it's nice and smooth. 3 washes. Has to be totally dry before you put on your next wash. This is after my first wash. You can see, look at that. You can see lines. You can see where it dried darker in some spots because it puddled a little bit. It's perfectly fine because I'm going to be putting on 2 more washes. This one has to really dry before I put on 2, and then super dry before I put on 3. I actually left a day between my washes for my background so that it would be super dry and I wouldn't have to worry. These washes you can do a little bit quicker. I'm still using my number 2 to get up close, and I'm using my big brush to do my bigger areas. But you want to get up nice and close again. You want to brush your background on nice and wet, super duper wet. If you mixed enough in your puddle the day before, all you have to do is put a little bit of water to it and it'll be right back where it was, nice and wet. But you want to get enough so that you're not trying to mix color right in the middle of your background. That is a big no-no. Mix enough that you have it. Now you want to let that really dry. And now finally we're going to take off our misketing, both the stamen area and the little tip that I have on my leaf. My stamen areas, I'm going to paint them all with some very pale cadmium yellow. A couple of them are a little bit more intense in color, so I will paint those areas with some yellow ochre. And when the stamen are nice and dry, I'm following my picture and outlining with really thin lines with my rigger or my fine liner with my burnt sienna. Real fine. Yellow first. The darker areas, I put another wash on with some yellow ochre when my first yellow was dry. And then when the stamen are nice and dry, I followed my picture and did my outlines with a very fine liner and my burnt sienna. Use your very fine liner. You don't want these lines to be thick. You want them to be nice and thin. And you're using burnt sienna. Just follow your picture. You'll be doing the same thing on the other bud, same coloring, same detail. Okay, now we are going to remove the last little bit of misket we have on our tip of our leaf and the one little edge. We're going to be painting those in with burnt sienna, which is that little warm brown color. Just the very tip of that leaf and the very edge to our other leaf. If you didn't do the edge to that leaf, that's perfectly fine too. That was just something that I added in, not necessarily from the picture, but just to give my leaf edge a little bit of a difference, a different color. And now it looks great. If you feel that you're going to need another wash on your background, again, I would leave it go for at least 24 hours before you put another wash on. And the only reason you would need a wash is if you really see some brush strokes, but otherwise I would just leave it go. Any little touch-ups that you need to do, you certainly don't have to do them right at this time. You can look at it for a couple days and admire your wonderful work. And anything that needs to be added with watercolor, it's simply another wash that you're able to do. So I hope you enjoyed this amaryllis painting. It's a beautiful painting. That dark background just makes those white flowers super pop out. I'm glad that you could be with us for this tutorial. We again thank the Monroeville Public Library for their support and for their exceptional display of these videos for you. You can access them anytime. We hope you'll become a member or support the Monroeville Public Library with all of their many events and classes that they hold on a continuous basis. So thank you again, and definitely happy painting. I'm Marcy Mason, and again, if you would like to see all of my paintings, you can look me up on Instagram, Marcy Watercolors, and hopefully you'll take a peek. Thank you.